Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for what might be our most ambitious and maybe most cosmically challenging deep dive yet.
I think that's fair to say.
We're taking a stack of sources that link these ancient models of time, specifically the transition between vast zodiacal ages to the very intense, very immediate cultural chaos we all see playing out on our screens every single day.
We're basically zooming out, way out, thousands of years out, to try and get some perspective on the friction that's happening right now.
Exactly. And specifically the friction in the realm of gender conflict and, this incredible societal polarization.
That's right. And our mission today is really clearly defined by the source material we're working with. We are not just observing the social friction, we're analyzing it as a deep and I think painful symptom of a macro-scale transition.
A transition that's both astrological and sociological.
Precisely. It's this colossal shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. This is like the background hum against which all this modern conflict is being fought. And our journey today, it moves from diagnosis to a cure.
A cure, I like that.
We're going to move through some really sharp, data-driven critiques of contemporary gender dynamics, specifically looking at the MGTOW movement as a kind of cultural artifact of this breakdown. And then we pivot entirely.
And this is the part I'm really excited about.
The whole second half of this deep dive is about proposing a decentralized, actionable blueprint for building local societal resilience in response to all this chaos.
So it sounds like we're starting with millennia of cosmic history and ending with a highly practical construction blueprint for your neighborhood.
That's the plan.
This is exactly the kind of massive conceptual leap that makes the deep dive so interesting. Okay, so let's unpack the foundational concepts we need to get our heads around. We need to introduce these two massive time frames clearly. The sources define the Piscean age as roughly the last 2 millennia, and they link it to the element of water.
And that element is everything. You have to think about what water does. It dissolves, it merges. It's about idealism and emotion.
Okay, so sociologically, what does a water age look like?
It gave us these vast centralized belief systems. This was the era of great spiritual hierarchies, of fixed institutional roles. It was the triumph of faith over, say, individual reason.
So identity was found by merging into something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. Merging into a collective narrative, a fixed structure, whether that was the church, the monarchy, or, on a smaller scale, the rigidly defined nuclear family. The core psychological engine of this whole age was I believe.
That makes sense. Everything was top-down, fixed, and it required sacrifice for the collective good, whether that collective was the state or the family unit.
Absolutely. Now, you contrast that with the age we're now transitioning into. The Aquarian age. That's an air sign.
So we're moving from water to air.
A huge shift. It's a move from emotional merging to intellectual clarity. Aquarius emphasizes intellect, radical individualism, freedom, technology, and crucially, a systematic rebellion against dogma and centralized authority.
Which is why the transition feels so turbulent.
It's incredibly turbulent because the Aquarian energy doesn't just, reform the old Piscean structures. It shatters them.
And the psychological core shifts from, I believe, to
the much more detached and analytical I know. The sources are really clear on this. The age of Aquarius is characterized by this drive toward decentralization, rational analysis, and independence.
Which brings us to our starting point. Our deep dive begins by looking at a very specific, and I should say highly volatile, cultural phenomenon as our primary piece of evidence for this transition, the MGTOW movement. The source material we have is really fascinating because it doesn't just dismiss movements like MGTOW, that's men going their own way, as, just some internet phenomenon or generalized misogyny.
No, it treats it very seriously as a cultural artifact. A specific and predictable reaction to the breakdown of those deep-seated Pietian paradigms we just talked about.
Right, and just to define it for anyone who isn't familiar, MGTOW is characterized by men separating themselves from traditional relationships, from marriage, and from those societal expectations of provision.
And it's often framed as a direct critique of modern cultural dynamics, including, of course, certain strains of feminism.
Okay, so to really understand why MGTOW is, as the sources say, the perfect symptom of this cultural dissolution, we need to detail those contrasting social paradigms.
Let's do it. The Piscean paradigm idealized the romantic union. It saw the nuclear family and marriage as almost a sacred institution, underpinned by mutual sacrifice and interdependence.
You had those fixed roles.
Very fixed roles. The man as the external provider and protector, the woman as the internal nurturer and homemaker. Your identity, your social value, was deeply, deeply intertwined with how well you maintained these emotional bonds and fulfilled these roles.
You sacrificed your individual wants for the family's collective stability. That Piscean ideal again.
And the Aquarian disruption just shatters that. It shatters that fixed identity and that demand for sacrifice. The Aquarian shift is intellectual. It emphasizes autonomy, technology, decentralization.
So sociologically, what we're experiencing is the turbulent dismantling of those fixed Piscean structures.
And MGTOW becomes one of the clearest expressions of men choosing that radical Aquarian autonomy over the dissolving social contract.
That's the critical link. The sources say the MGTOW movement embodies this emerging Aquarian impulse in 4 very specific ways. Let's break those down. The first one is the rejection of Piscean sacrifice.
Yes, the traditional male role required massive and often totally unseen sacrifice. We're talking financial underwriting, emotional suppression, taking on huge legal risk, all within a system that MGTOW adherents see as overwhelmingly unfair and biased against them.
So they look at the traditional deal, the deal where a man had to sort of self-abnegate for the sake of the family unit, and they're saying it no longer offers a worthwhile return on investment.
Especially since the collective itself is dissolving.
Right?
Exactly. Their rejection of sponsoring women's lives is a direct repudiation of that Piscean expectation of martyrdom. They're basically asking a very logical, very Aquarian question. If the system of marriage and family no longer guarantees loyalty or stability, why should I continue to pay the Piscean cost?
It's a rational calculation, which leads to the second trait, the rise of autonomy. This seems like the purest expression of Aquarian individualism.
It is. The whole philosophy, going their own way, is about prioritizing personal freedom, self-sovereignty, and individual goals above any social expectation or emotional entanglement.
It's the detached observer archetype.
Perfectly put. They are retreating from what they see as the emotional battlefield of modern dating and family life, and they're moving to a stance of radical self-sufficiency. They want to manage all aspects of their own lives without reliance on or accountability to a partner or the institution of marriage.
And this leads directly to the intellectual shift. This is that move from water, emotion, to air, intellect. Intellectual detachment over emotional merging.
This might be the most defining Aquarian aspect of the whole movement. Adherents don't approach relationships through the lens of romance or idealism or the inherent sanctity of the union.
No, they're running the numbers.
They are running the numbers. They apply detached logic, risk assessment, and a transactional cost-benefit analysis. They are calculating the potential financial, social, and legal fallout before they even consider any kind of commitment.
It's a psychological defense mechanism.
A necessary one, from their perspective, against the perceived volatility of this collapsing Piscean social contract. In an age where commitment has become, for them, a high-risk proposition, analysis has to replace affection.
And the fourth trait really highlights the nature of the Aquarian age itself. Technological facilitation.
Yes, Aquarius governs information networks, technology, decentralized communication. MGTOW's growth is fundamentally an internet phenomenon. It couldn't have existed on this scale 30 years ago.
It's a product of its technological environment.
Completely. Digital platforms allow these decentralized, highly niche communities to form and then rapidly spread ideologies that challenge the mainstream narrative. And they do it by entirely bypassing the traditional Piscean gatekeepers.
So academia, mainstream media, the established social authorities.
All bypass. It's a truly bottom-up, digitally native philosophy.
And if we look at the broader culture, the sociological impact of this whole transition is it's intense. It's experienced as extreme polarization into these ideological tribes.
That shared Piscean reality, those common ideals that used to define commitment and family, they're dissolving.
And the result is the kind of bitter, often online conflict we see every day.
And we see the structural consequences of this conflict in real hard numbers. The sources point directly to the decline of traditional institutions. You just have to look at falling marriage rates, falling birth rates.
That Piscean emphasis on the family unit, which was the core stability mechanism for 2,000 years.
It's being systematically replaced by individualized living arrangements and a prioritization of self-actualization over reproduction or community stability. This ideological conflict is literally reshaping the demographic blueprint of our entire society.
Okay, let's unpack the shift in the contract. We have to zoom in on the counterforce here. And this leads us to a really crucial question posed in the source material.
It's the central question, I think.
Was MGTOW a simple reaction to women gaining fundamental legal and economic equality, which is, let's be clear, indisputably a good thing? Or was it a reaction to the ideological consequences of modern feminism, which is a much broader and more complex force?
And that distinction is absolutely crucial.
Why is it so crucial to understanding the conflict?
The sources make it clear that failing to make that distinction just completely obscures the root cause of the breakdown. Feminism is not synonymous with women. It is a spectrum of ideologies.
To assume they're the same is to ignore the fact that a significant number of
Or
women
a huge number.
staunchly reject the label feminist, even if they fully support equal rights and opportunities.
And the very existence of that rejection suggests there are clear perceived cultural costs attached to the ideology itself, separate from the goal of equality.
So we need to explore what the sources identify as those perceived costs and criticisms, often coming from women themselves, that lead to the rejection of the contemporary movement's core tenets.
Okay, the sources lay out 4 major points here, which show how the ideology can sometimes work against the interests of the very people it's supposed to serve. First up is the devaluation of traditional roles.
The Pitian rule.
Exactly. Critics argue that in the relentless pursuit of workplace equality, certain strains of feminism often characterize the traditional homemaker role as inherently oppressive or weak or unintellectual.
So women who genuinely find fulfillment in being a primary caregiver or in a domestic partnership.
They feel marginalized. They feel judged by the dominant cultural narrative that says professional achievement is the only valid form of female empowerment.
And that sets up an immediate conflict between women who choose professional autonomy and women who choose a more traditional path to fulfillment.
Precisely. The second perceived cost is the perception of adversarial dynamics.
Meaning what, exactly?
Critics argue that the movement, at certain points, moved beyond simply demanding equality and began to actively foster conflict. It started characterizing masculinity itself as inherently toxic or systematically minimizing male-specific struggles like workplace deaths or suicide rates.
And the shift from cooperation to confrontation.
It directly contributes to the breakdown in trust and partnership that a movement like MGTOW is a direct reaction against. It recasts the relationship between the sexes as a power struggle, not a partnership.
Okay, and what about the internal pressure on women? The promise of having it all seems to have backfired for many.
That's the third point, the profound have-it-all paradox. Critics say that modern feminism created this unsustainable internal pressure, this expectation to simultaneously excel in a demanding career, be a perfectly attentive mother, and manage a home to a high standard.
It doesn't sound like liberation.
For many, it doesn't feel like liberation or choice. It feels like an overwhelming recipe for burnout and exhaustion.
And finally, the ideological split itself.
Yes, many women just have a fundamental ideological disagreement with the contemporary tenets of the movement. Things like its critiques of capitalism, or the nuclear family, or its deep entanglement with critical theories. These things extend far beyond the initial pragmatic push for suffrage or equal pay.
They might want equal opportunity, but they don't necessarily want the entire political philosophy that now comes with it.
Exactly. So now we have to understand how this ideology altered that fundamental implicit social contract over time, leading to MGTOW's eventual reaction. And to do that, we have to look at the generational shifts, wave by wave.
Let's track the fracturing of the contract. We start with the second wave, from the 60s to the 80s.
Right. The second wave was focused on dismantling the feminine mystique, achieving sexual liberation, and gaining economic independence. This was the first direct, fundamental questioning of that Piscean contract.
The contract being male provision and protection in exchange for female domesticity and fidelity.
And the impact was immediate and structural.
You mean divorce rates?
It was seismic. The clearest impact was a sharp rise in divorce rates, which was notably facilitated by the introduction of no-fault divorce laws.
So once women gained the legal and economic means to exit the contract easily, the entire social fabric shifted.
The risk assessment for men changed overnight. The deal was no longer guaranteed.
Then we hit the third wave, the 90s and 2000s. This was the era of girl power, individualism, and self-actualization rhetoric.
The attitude shift here was this strong, almost aggressive emphasis on personal empowerment, and crucially, not settling for anything less than the ideal.
And the impact of that, according to the MGTOW critique.
It's sometimes translated into a sense of entitlement, this pervasive belief that one should never have to compromise or settle in relationships, regardless of the cost of stability. This wave also critically reinforced the decoupling of sex from long-term commitment, which completely altered the terms of the mating market.
And that brings us to the most recent wave, the fourth wave, from the 2010s to the present. Digitally driven, social justice critique, the #MeToo movement.
This era brought extreme relational pressure and incredibly stringent standards. The attitude shifted to demanding very high expectations for partners. We're talking wealth, emotional intelligence, and increasingly perfect ideological alignment.
Zero tolerance for any perceived historical or systemic inequality.
And sociologically, the impact is this highly pressurized, highly transactional dating market. It's fueled by the illusion of infinite choice that you get from dating apps and social media, which just creates maximum expectations for maximizing your personal benefit in a partner.
So we circle back to MGTOW. The sources argue the movement is not reacting to women simply voting or working.
No, it is reacting to the cumulative effect of these specific attitudinal and systemic shifts that have made commitment a high-risk, low-reward proposition for a growing number of men.
And the core of their reaction rests on a few key pillars.
4 main ones, really, that synthesize everything we've just discussed. First, and most obviously, the broken contract. They argue that women, influenced by generations of this empowerment rhetoric and the subsequent rise of hypergamy, they abandoned their side of the traditional deal loyalty, nurturing, stability.
But they still expected men to fulfill the provider and protector role.
Exactly. But now without any guarantee of reciprocity.
Second, the high-risk legal environment.
The legal consequences are cited constantly as the primary institutional bias. Divorce, alimony, and custody laws are viewed not as gender-neutral systems, but as institutions designed to financially and emotionally punish men who attempt to uphold that traditional Piscean role.
So marriage gets reframed. It's no longer a sacred union.
It becomes an Aquarian high-risk legal contract that, from their perspective, any rational individual must analytically opt out of.
And third, this completes the loop, the erosion of masculine identity.
Yes. When women became economically autonomous, the traditional male role, the primary social function of providing it, lost its necessity and its meaning. Society offered women all these expanded roles and a path to autonomy, but, according to the MGTOW critique, it offered men no valued, acceptable replacement function.
And when traditional male traits are simultaneously labeled toxic,
men retreat. They retreat into movements like MGTOW to try and forge a new, purely autonomous, self-reliant identity outside of the system altogether. They're trying to define their value purely internally, free from the demands of a social contract they believe has fundamentally failed them.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting. We now have to move beyond the ideological rhetoric of individualism and self-sufficiency, and we need to examine the profound contradictions that appear when we apply hard sociological metrics from our source material.
This is where the ideological narrative meets the physical reality, and it's a collision.
The section reveals the paradox of the fourth wave most clearly. You have the simultaneous push for radical, individualized identity.
But at the same time, you have this collective, highly standardized list of requirements for potential male partners. High income, high status, a certain physical height, being willing to accept previous children.
And the sources ask a very pointed question. If individualism and self-sufficiency are the goal, why the nearly identical standardized checklists?
And the resolution, according to the sources, is that the individualism being promoted is often not about unique self-expression. It's about optimized selection. It's about maximizing personal benefit and entitlement within this new transactional mating market.
So the Aquarian tools, the dating apps, and social media, they facilitate this.
They do. They create an illusion of infinite choice, which encourages the use of standardized filters to optimize your outcome in a market where everyone is competing for the top fraction of partners.
And the optimization process is driven by a collective consensus on what constitutes a high-value man.
And that collective definition completely negates the claim of individual choice.
The standardization, the sources argue, reflects the deep-seated evolutionary driver of hypergamy.
Right. Hypergamy being the tendency to seek a mate with equal or higher status or resources than oneself.
An ancient driver.
Ancient.
Yeah.
And the key insight here is that modern ideology doesn't eliminate this imperative. It supercharges it. By removing the economic necessity for women to settle for provision, the ideological framework implicitly validates the pursuit of only the top percentile of men, those who offer the highest combination of status, wealth, and emotional intelligence.
The contradiction is profound. An ideology that claims to dismantle traditional roles actually facilitates the extreme, highly competitive expression of a very ancient, very traditional evolutionary mating strategy.
That's the paradox in a nutshell.
Okay, let's move to the sociological realities that challenge the narrative of generalized self-sufficiency. Let's talk about the protection paradox. This is a powerful metric.
It is. The question is a simple one. Do women, generally speaking, protect themselves in the infrastructure of safety, or is their independence overwhelmingly subsidized by the protective labor and physical risk undertaken by men in the aggregate?
This is where the data becomes absolutely critical. It forces a reckoning with how civilization actually functions.
It really does. I mean, when we look at the infrastructure of safety, the people who show up when the system fails, it is overwhelmingly male. Our sources cite that men account for 85.6% of police officers and 95.4% of firefighters in the U.S.
Wait, can we pause on that? 95.4% of firefighters. That statistic alone fundamentally challenges the narrative of generalized self-sufficiency and the rejection of a protective function.
It does, and it goes beyond public service. We have to look at who performs the most physically dangerous and infrastructure-critical work, and that's the most telling metric cited in the sources. Men account for approximately 92% of all workplace fatalities every single year.
92%.
They completely dominate the high-risk industries. Commercial fishing, logging, construction, power line repair, infrastructure maintenance. These are the jobs that maintain the physical stability of modern life that we all take for granted.
So the core implication is crystal clear. The economic and personal independence enjoyed by the modern woman is fundamentally subsidized by the physical risk and life-threatening labor undertaken by men in the aggregate.
Precisely. The argument is this. Rejecting a private male partner's protection doesn't make a woman truly independent. It just means she has outsourced her security entirely to the state apparatus, the police, the military, the infrastructure workers, who are, as the data shows, overwhelmingly male, and whose existence requires the continued disproportionate risk-taking by men.
The dismissal of the need for male protection, which is facilitated by the ideology, it sacrifices localized, immediate protection for a reliance on the state's reactive apparatus.
Which creates a significant psychological blind spot. A false sense of security that the sources suggest is a luxury only afforded by the quiet maintenance of this high-risk disparity.
It's the height of Piscean idealism, an emotional belief in self-sufficiency that ignores the hard Aquarian data showing how that self-sufficiency is physically maintained.
Exactly. And we see this similar critical nuance when we look at the provision gap in economic equality. The narrative is that women are providing for themselves, which is true in terms of earning an income, absolutely.
Right.
But the data on economic power and economic scale tells a very, very different story about who controls the direction of the economy.
Let's look at entrepreneurship first. That's the engine of economic growth.
Right. Women own a significant portion of U.S. businesses. The number's around 40 to 43%. And this is often cited as proof of massive economic parity. But the sources emphasize the critical disparity in scale.
We need to explain that scale disparity for our listener who may not be an economist. What do we mean by scale?
When we say scale, we mean revenue and employment impact. The vast majority of women-owned businesses are categorized as non-employer firms or solo operations. Think local consultancies, small service businesses, highly specialized small ventures.
Okay, so a lot of businesses, but not a lot of economic weight.
That's the critical point. Even with those 40+% ownership numbers, women-owned businesses account for only about 6% of total U.S. business revenue.
6%, just 6% of the total revenue generated. That is a vast, profound gap.
It is. It means that while many women are economically independent, the massive economy-driving industrial, technology, energy, and infrastructure companies, the ones that generate the bulk of the wealth and employment in the country, remain overwhelmingly founded and controlled by men.
The lack of scale, not the lack of effort, is the issue.
Exactly. If you control 6% of the revenue, you control 6% of the economic weight, regardless of how many individual businesses you own.
And this disparity continues at the very top of the corporate ladder, even in the face of significant institutional pressure to close that gap.
Correct. In corporate leadership, the numbers fall off a cliff at the apex. Women hold only about 10.4% of Fortune 500 CEO positions.
Only 10%.
And furthermore, while women make up about 29% of the C-suite, which sounds better, the sources note they are often concentrated in support roles, human resources, communications, legal, rather than the operational P&L roles.
Profit and loss roles. The ones responsible for generating revenue and managing the core business functions. The ones that typically lead to the CEO track.
Exactly. This concentration in support roles reinforces the same structure we saw in the provision gap.
And the sources suggest that even these modest numbers at the top are significantly influenced by things like government oversight and DEI initiatives.
I strongly suggest that, implying that the gap would be far wider without that constant institutional intervention. So the conclusion that women are fully providing for themselves has to be placed alongside the reality that men still dominate the highest risk professions, generate the vast majority of business revenue, and control the highest levers of economic power. The narrative and the data just don't align. The empirical data we just covered, the reality of provision, the reality of protection, it forces us to fundamentally revisit our initial analysis. It has to.
Right. If feminism acts as a solvent for traditional structures, and yet it promotes this standardized, collectivist set of relationship requirements and relies so heavily on emotional narrative over objective data, is it truly the Aquarian vanguard of rational individualism?
It's a critical question.
Yeah.
And to answer it, we have to look at the nature of ideology itself. The source material asks, if your worldview is prefabricated and supplied by a mass movement, are you an individualist or are you a collectivist?
That's a good question.
Adherence to an established ideology, any established totalizing worldview, is inherently an act of collectivism. It substitutes genuine, independent thought for group validation and emotional consensus.
True individualism, the Aquarian principle, is the much harder path.
Much harder. It's the arduous process of developing a unique, reality-tested worldview through critical, objective analysis. The standardized dating lists we talked about earlier are a perfect, micro-level example of substituting real individuality for group validation and collective desire.
So let's tie this back to the zodiacal archetypes, and let's refine our definitions. Pisces governs collectivism, the past, belief, emotional merging, dissolution.
And Aquarius governs individualism, the future, knowledge, rational shattering, and intellectual detachment.
Okay, so when viewed through this new lens...
When viewed through this lens, the widespread adoption of contemporary feminism as a dominant cultural worldview functions overwhelmingly as a Piscean phenomenon. It operates like a dominant cultural faith. It's characterized by strong emotional consensus, rigid dogma, and these shared narratives of victimhood and salvation.
All classic Piscean archetypes.
All of them. It requires belief, often in direct defiance of the hard data we just discussed.
And the primary action of the movement, is it rational rebellion or is it corrosive dissolution? The sources make a crucial distinction here that informs the entire thesis.
Yes, Aquarian change is sharp. It's rational. It seeks to empirically shatter flawed structures and replace them with something functionally superior. Think of the scientific method replacing superstition. That's Aquarian.
And Piscean change.
Piscean change is emotional. It's corrosive. It works by dissolving the boundaries, the definitions, the certainties that uphold the existing structure until the whole thing collapses under its own weight.
And the most profound impact of contemporary feminism has been
the dissolution of boundaries. The boundary between genders, the social contract, the boundary between objective reality and subjective experience. This dissolving quality is the very essence of the Piscean archetype. It's the endless merging water.
And if we look at the nature of the critique itself, we saw in Section 3 that empirical facts regarding protection and provision are often just subordinated to the emotional narrative.
The critique in its most extreme forms is driven primarily by Piscean emotional desires. Idealism, narratives of collective suffering, the victim-martyr archetype. It's all seeking emotional equity and ideological purity.
An actual Aquarian critique would prioritize what?
Detached logic, empirical data, and functional, pragmatic solutions over satisfying and emotional consensus.
And finally, the technology element. We established that the internet is Aquarian infrastructure. It's decentralized, it's logical, it's information-based. But what is running on that infrastructure?
That's the key. The sources conclude that the technology system is Aquarian logical decentralized. But the entity inhabiting it, this mass ideology, this emotional consensus, this dogmatic collectivism, is Piscean.
It's a foreign, incompatible presence using the infrastructure for incompatible ends.
Exactly. It's like using a supercomputer to run ancient religious texts. This is the Piscean ghost in the Aquarian machine. It's the last gasp of Piscean emotional collectivism, amplified by the global, decentralized network of Aquarius.
This leads to the ultimate synthesis, which is really the core finding of this deep dive. Contemporary feminism is not the Aquarian vanguard.
No, it is a late-stage Piscean phenomenon, idealism, dogma, and collectivism that has been weaponized by Aquarian intellect and technology. It uses the tools of rational thought to enforce an emotional consensus.
And conversely, MGTOW is better understood as what?
As a pragmatic, individualized, and highly analytical Aquarian response. It's not an ideology seeking to reshape the world with a grand plan. It is a decentralized recognition by individuals who apply rational risk assessment to the unfavorable conditions created by this ideological clash, and they logically opt out of the transaction entirely.
So the cultural conflict we're seeing
Is the sound of the Piscean era collapsing upon itself, driven by the intellectual detachment of the coming age?
We've analyzed the breakdown, the ideology, the contradictions. We've established that the system is fracturing because its foundation, that Piscean social contract, has dissolved.
Gone.
So now we have to ask the critical question. If the house is divided and ideology only fuels the division, how do we build a durable structure? The solution requires a new way of living, moving from centralized dogma to decentralized objective action.
And this is the essential shift from critique to construction. We have to stop arguing about which ideology is right and start building things that actually work.
Which is where we introduce the concept of resilience networks.
Yes. Small, autonomous action groups, ideally between 5 to 15 people. Their mission is strictly defined, solving concrete, local, objective problems. They exist to build what you could call a parallel structure, or a polis, based purely on competence, trust, and measurable outcomes. They bypass the entire ideological debate that is tearing the center apart.
Why the small size, 5 to 15 people?
That size is derived from military and sociological models. It's the maximum size that allows for high trust, rapid decision-making without a formalized hierarchy. It's a group where the failure of one or two members can be easily absorbed without mission failure.
It prioritizes reliability over raw numbers.
Exactly.
Okay, so phase one then is identifying the objective sociological vulnerabilities, the core pressure points where the centralized system is currently failing all of us regardless of our political affiliation. What are the four most critical areas the sources identify that require immediate local relief?
First, and maybe the most pervasive, is the crisis of meaning and connection. This is manifesting as the epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, and severe drug addiction opioids and fentanyl, which are just destroying communities from the inside out.
And the pressure point there?
It's the lack of non-ideological, competence-based community structures where individuals, especially young men, feel valued, necessary, and useful. The centralized system offers abstract therapeutic relief. It fails to provide practical purpose.
Okay, second vulnerability, the localized safety net.
That's the dramatic erosion of social capital and safety. We're seeing rising property crime, violent crime, criminal recidivism, and the growth of gang violence. The pressure point is that the community has outsourced all responsibility for safety, for mentorship, and for the reintegration of marginalized individuals entirely to the state.
And when the state fails to contain that problem,
The community has no localized fallback mechanism. It's completely vulnerable.
third, the practical risks of living in an overly complex, centralized society. What happens when the trucks stop running?
That's the fragility of essential infrastructure. Our society relies on these incredibly complex, just-in-time supply chains for everything: food, water, energy, medicine. The critical pressure point is the complete inability of local communities to sustain themselves for more than a few days if those centralized systems fail.
Due to a climate event, an economic shock, a cyber attack,
Anything. Hyperspecialization equals hyperfragility.
and finally, a vulnerability that impacts our ability to fix all the others. The skills needed to actually build the resilience.
Yes, the skills gap and loss of practical competence. We have a populace that is, abstractly well-educated but over-specialized in non-physical knowledge work. We are severely lacking in fundamental trades, plumbing, electrical repair, basic masonry, agriculture, first aid, engineering fundamentals.
The pressure point is the inability to solve physical world problems without expensive professional external intervention.
Right. If the system fails, our ability to self-repair is near zero.
So once these objective vulnerabilities are mapped, phase two is forming the action group, the resilience nucleus. How do we go about forming these small, high-trust groups effectively, avoiding the ideological purity tests that dominate all modern interactions?
The search criteria are absolutely paramount. You must focus on competence, reliability, and emotional stability, not on ideological alignment.
Yeah.
You're looking for people who show up 15 minutes early and follow through on their commitments, even small ones.
You're looking for doers, not talkers.
Precisely.
So, where do you find people who possess these traits, since they are largely absent from online political discussion?
You look in local, skill-based environments where practical ability is demonstrated and required. Volunteer fire departments, search and rescue teams, community gardens where things actually grow, martial arts gyms that emphasize discipline, maker spaces and trade unions.
You bypass the ideological chaos of national politics.
And you focus conversations strictly on local, tangible problems. Our park is unsafe, or we have no community access to potable water.
And the key to vetting is moving beyond just conversation.
Trust is built through repeated, successful action. especially under stress, on small, manageable projects, not just talking about philosophy. The group has to constantly ask, can this person be relied upon when the consequences are real? Do they integrate the learning from a failure, or do they dissolve into blame and finger-pointing?
And the group should define a narrow, actionable mission.
Based on the vulnerabilities, yes. For example, establishing water filtration and storage capacity for the 3 surrounding apartment buildings, rather than saving the environment. This radical focus prevents that Piscean impulse toward sprawling ideological abstraction. It keeps it real.
Okay, let's transition from theory to actionable steps. We have our nucleus, we have our defined vulnerabilities. Now, we need the blueprint. What do these groups do once they are formed to immediately address the pressure points and provide that much-needed antidote to modern malaise?
We start by directly solving the crisis of meaning and addiction. The action here is to create sobriety and skills programs. The group should secure a simple workspace, a garage, a donated shop area, recruit competent tradespeople, and this is where the older generations become absolutely critical.
They hold the knowledge.
They hold the practical knowledge. And you begin teaching tangible, marketable skills welding, basic plumbing, woodworking, foundational coding to individuals in recovery, or those suffering from chronic loneliness and lack of purpose.
The power here is the therapeutic aspect of competence. It's not just about the skill.
Absolutely. The shared, purposeful labor and the demonstrable acquisition of competence is the therapy. It restores dignity and purpose far better than abstract talk ever could. The goal is creating a new hierarchy based on skill and responsibility, providing a positive tribe for people who desperately need one.
Okay. For the erosion of social capital and safety, recidivism, and violence, the group needs to act as a genuine replacement community, offering a path out of that existing cycle.
This requires establishing reintegration and mentorship pathways. And this is some of the hardest work. The group partners directly with local parole officers, youth programs, or community leaders to offer ex-convicts or at-risk youth a new tribe.
A tribe whose currency is what?
Responsibility, accountability, and practical contribution, not violence or victimhood. The group provides mentorship in small but valuable roles in their other projects. This is highly demanding work that requires extraordinary emotional fortitude and strict accountability from the group. You have to avoid the Piscean pitfall of sentimental coddling.
And addressing the fragility of essential infrastructure and food is where the hands-on physical work really begins.
This means localized resource mapping and production. The group must first map every existing local asset, reliable water sources like wells or streams, energy generation potential like solar, local repair shops, and localized food availability. Then critically, they secure land, vacant lots, rooftops, unused institutional land, and they start localized food production intensive gardening, vertical farming, aquaponics, to buffer the community against supply chain shocks.
The sources emphasize that these efforts are not about self-sufficiency for one person, but resilience for the local ecosystem.
Exactly. A key step is establishing neighborhood cooperatives for bulk purchasing from nearby farmers and regional producers. This shortens the supply chain and makes the community less dependent on just-in-time delivery systems that originate thousands of miles away. This tangible work pulls people away from abstraction and tethers them to physical reality.
And finally, addressing the skills gap requires continuous internal development and then sharing that knowledge outward.
That's achieved through cross-training and community workshops. Internally, the group actively cross-trains. The IT specialist learns emergency first aid, the medic learns generator maintenance, the plumber learns basic security logistics.
So everyone becomes more versatile.
Everyone. Then, they host free, accessible workshops for the broader community, basic plumbing fixes, simple first aid, car repair, how to turn off your utilities in an emergency. This builds crucial goodwill, it elevates the community's baseline competence, and it acts as a vital recruitment channel for new, competent members.
The sources emphasize that engaging in this kind of work is the necessary antidote to modern malaise, which is so often characterized by loneliness and a feeling of powerlessness.
The personal and interpersonal benefits are profound because they address deep human needs. First, you get the restoration of agency. You shift your identity from a passive consumer, the societal failure, just constantly scrolling through news feeds about things you can't control, to an active participant who is measurably improving their own security and their communities.
Second, genuine connection.
Bonds forged in shared physical struggle and objective competence are so much deeper and more durable than digital interactions or shared ideological outrage. And most importantly, you fulfill the fundamental human need for purpose and meaning by being useful and necessary to other people.
But as the source material required, we have to address the common apathy and the excuses directly. A lot of listeners might be nodding along right now, but will immediately retreat when faced with the demand for action. So let's counter the resistance.
Let's do it. Let's take the first most common excuse. I don't have time. I have work and family commitments.
The big one.
The counter-argument is that this work is the foundational layer of security for your family's future. If the centralized system fails, your salary will mean nothing if you can't provide food, water, or safety. So start small. Commit 3 focused hours a week. And crucially, integrate your family. Teach your children these skills. Make the work a modeling exercise in agency and responsibility.
The second excuse often involves fear and self-doubt. It's too dangerous, or I'm not qualified.
The sources counter that inaction is always more dangerous in the long run, because unchecked societal decay will inevitably affect you and your loved ones. And every skill set is needed. Logistics, communication, resource management, budgeting. You don't have to be the one on the front line, but you have to contribute to the overall operation success. Your unique skill, even if it's abstract, has a tangible application in a decentralized network. And the grand, paralyzing excuse of our era, it won't make a difference. The problems are too big, too entrenched. This is a classic Piscean trap relying on the grand, centralized solution that's never coming. The critical counter is, the goal is not to save the world or defeat the system. The goal is to improve your immediate corner of it. The power of this model is radical decentralization. 1,000 small, independent, competent groups working in parallel create massive systemic change that cannot be easily stopped, co-opted, or dismissed by centralized ideology. Small actions compound into insurmountable resilience.
As these groups engage in high-stress, high-stakes local problem-solving, whether it's running a community resource exchange or intervening in a localized safety issue, they're going to need strong mental tools.
Absolutely. They need them to maintain objectivity, to avoid ideological capture, and to prevent emotional burnout. This is where the Aquarian emphasis on clear, objective thinking becomes absolutely crucial.
And the sources provide a list of essential psychological and decision-making tools adopted from high-stakes environments like the military, medicine, and engineering.
Right, they're all designed to override our cognitive biases and maintain pragmatic objectivity.
Let's start with the 2 primary systems of self-evaluation that are required for growth.
First, we have the after-action review, or AAR. After every project, no matter how small, from building a compost bin to conducting a large-scale mentorship pathway, the group has to rigorously ask 4 questions.
What are they?
1. What were the intended results? 2. What were the actual results? 3. Why was there a difference? And most importantly, 4. What did we learn and how will we integrate that learning next time?
It forces growth based purely on reality, not on how the group feels about the outcome.
Exactly. It's an ego killer, and it's essential.
And its predictive counterpart. We need to prevent spectacular failure before it happens.
That's the pre-mortem analysis. Before a project even begins, the group gathers and imagines it has failed spectacularly 1 month later. They then brainstorm all the possible reasons for that failure.
Like what? Give me an example.
We ran out of water because we foolishly relied on the city grid, or the community garden was raided because we failed to secure it, or we had a leadership breakdown because we never defined roles. Then they proactively design systems to mitigate those identified risks in advance.
It's tactical pessimism.
Designed to prevent blind Piscean optimism.
Now for the psychological systems that aid in clarity and control in difficult circumstances.
We strongly recommend practical stoicism. This focuses entirely on the dichotomy of control. You focus only on what is within your power, your actions, your responses, your effort, and you rationally let go of what is not.
External events, the weather, the behavior of centralized authorities.
All outside your control. This is the key system for preventing emotional burnout and maintaining motivation in the face of inevitable setbacks.
And what about addressing the common distortions in thinking that lead to ideological paralysis?
That's where CBT basics come in, cognitive behavioral therapy. Learning to identify and challenge common cognitive distortions like catastrophizing, everything is falling apart, or black and white thinking or emotional reasoning. It allows the group to replace those negative automatic thoughts with objective assessments based on data.
So it moves the group decisively away from Piscean emotional reaction.
And towards Aquarian detachment and objective strategy.
Finally, the critical decision-making framework adopted from military strategy, the OODA loop.
The OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, emphasizes rapid assessment and adaptation in dynamic environments. And the most important phase for a resilience network is orient.
Why orient?
Because it means constantly updating the group's mental models based on new data, rather than rigidly clinging to old ideologies or preconceived assumptions about how the community or the authorities should behave. If reality changes, you must rapidly update your map. This ensures the resilience networks remain pragmatic, data-driven, and tethered to objective reality, no matter what chaos is swirling around them.
The sources end with a powerful, quick final note regarding generational responsibility that underpins this entire resilience structure. It ties right back to the skills gap.
Yes, the source material specifically highlights a dangerous oversight regarding the generational skills crisis. As the boomers and Gen Xers who built and maintained the physical infrastructure of the modern world begin to age out, society faces an ever-increasing catastrophic dearth of trade skills and practical knowledge.
And there's a pervasive narrative among some older generations
That they are independent and that younger generations are basically a lost cause because of their technological focus and perceived apathy.
And this dismissal is fundamentally dangerous to the future of localized resilience.
Absolutely. The source argues that this belief is patently false and profoundly dangerous. Younger generations haven't been taught. They've been given primarily abstract, Piscean-style knowledge. Older generations must understand their existential role in proactively passing along their essential skills, from basic automotive repair to localized logistics and plumbing to their offspring and to the community, before that knowledge is lost forever.
If the physical skills gap isn't closed,
Any attempt at localized resilience, no matter how well planned with AARs and OD loops, is doomed to fail. The practical competence just won't be there to execute the plans. It is the immediate generational responsibility to close this gap. #outro. The conflicts we see playing out, the intense gender polarization, the MGTOW movement, the clash of ideologies, these are not isolated phenomena. They are the sound of the PN era collapsing.
and we've identified that the ideology driving this cultural dissolution is essentially a Piscean ghost.
A ghost utilizing the infrastructure of the Aquarian machine. And we cannot solve this using Piscean methods, collectivist ideology, emotional consensus, or continued reliance on failing centralized authority. It just won't work.
The path forward, then, must be through the pragmatic, analytical, decentralized energy of the incoming Aquarian age. That path starts not with a grand political march or changing the mind of a nation, but with your own local resilience network.
With that small, competent group dedicated to solving real, objective problems in your immediate corner of the world.
It is the only way to build a functional house when the centralized foundation is crumbling beneath us.
Knowledge without application is merely data. Resilience requires action.
Building on that crucial final note regarding the transfer of essential knowledge, we want to leave you with this provocative closing thought. How many skills do you possess right now, from basic repair to first aid or food preservation, that you could teach to someone younger that would directly contribute to your community's survival? Your resilience begins the moment you decide to share that knowledge.